I was a woman of logic, reason, and fierce independence. A professor of gender studies, I spent my life challenging traditional beliefs, tearing down patriarchal systems, and empowering women to claim their rights. Religion, especially Christianity, had always been something I viewed skeptically. Too many stories of oppression, control, and silence wrapped in its teachings. I preached that faith often kept women submissive and chained to outdated roles. I was proud of my intellect and my fierce conviction to question everything. But all that changed one fateful evening. I collapsed unexpectedly, heart failing in the middle of a lecture. The chaos around me, shouts, the frantic calls for help faded into a surreal silence as my consciousness slipped away. I was drifting into darkness, certain this was the end of my fight, my voice, my life. And then, in the void beyond life, I saw a light not harsh or blinding, but warm and inviting, pulling me closer with a gentle power I had never imagined. I found myself standing before a man whose eyes radiated compassion unlike anything I had ever experienced. He was not what I expected, not judgmental or condemning, but full of tender love. It was Jesus. I wanted to turn away, to reject him, as I had so often done in life, but something in his gaze melted my defenses. Tears welled up unbidden, pouring down my cheeks not from fear, but from a sudden overwhelming flood of grace and mercy. For the first time, I felt utterly seen, understood, and loved beyond measure. Jesus spoke to me softly, not with harshness, but with an invitation, to lay down my pride, my anger, and my doubts, and to open my heart to a love that transcends ideology. My tears kept falling, mingling sorrow and awe as I realized how much pain and bitterness I had carried, not just towards religion but within myself. In that moment, I understood that faith was not about control or oppression, but about freedom, to be fully loved and accepted as I am, with all my flaws and struggles. The feminist professor I was had been so focused on fighting systems of power that I had never allowed myself to experience this profound personal encounter with the divine. I wanted to stay in that light, to bathe in that mercy forever. But as the light gently began to recede, I was pulled back to my body, gasping for air in a hospital room. My heart was weak, but my soul was forever changed. I cried then not just from the physical pain, but from the realization that everything I thought I knew about faith, love, and God was about to be overturned. The journey ahead would be difficult, but I knew one thing for certain. I had met Jesus, and my life would never be the same again. Waking up was a shock. The sterile white hospital room, the beeping machines, the sterile voices, it all felt surreal compared to the vivid reality I had just experienced beyond death. My body ached, weak from the ordeal, but it was my soul that felt utterly transformed. Every fiber of my being wrestled with the encounter that had shattered the walls I had built around my heart. I kept replaying his face, the compassion in his eyes, the gentle kindness that had cut through my skepticism and resistance. Jesus wasn't the angry, judgmental figure I'd imagined or debated against so many times in my lectures. He was the embodiment of unconditional love, a love that embraced me even in my brokenness, my anger, my fears. I thought of all the ways I had rejected faith, how I had spoken boldly against churches and religious traditions, accusing them of silencing women and perpetuating injustice. But now I saw that I had been blind to the deeper truth, that faith, at its core, is about relationship, not rules, about grace, not judgment, about freedom, not chains. Tears came easily now, flowing not from pain, but from the overwhelming weight of grace that I had never truly understood until that moment. I realized how much bitterness and pain I had carried, pain that my intellect and activism had never healed. Jesus saw it all and loved me anyway. My mind raced with questions and doubts. How could I reconcile this experience with everything I had believed? Would my colleagues, my students, my friends ever understand or accept this new reality? The fear of rejection was real and sharp, but beneath it all was a newfound hope, hunger for truth that could not be ignored. I began to pray not the academic prayers I once mocked, but raw, heartfelt cries for guidance and courage. I wanted to live differently, to embody the love I had felt. But I knew the path ahead would be fraught with struggle, both within myself and with the world around me. Yet, I could not go back. Jesus had touched my heart in a way nothing else ever could. The feminist professor who died and met Jesus had been forever changed, broken open, humbled, and filled with a love that would redefine everything she thought she knew about faith, power, and freedom. The journey was just beginning. Days turned into weeks after I returned from the edge, but the impact of that encounter continued to ripple through every aspect of my life. My mind was a storm of conflicting emotions: wonder, fear, confusion, and an overwhelming sense of awe. I was no longer the woman who had walked into the hospital that night. Something deeper had shifted within me, something I could not articulate fully, but felt with every heartbeat. I struggled to process the fact that Jesus, whom I had often dismissed in my lectures as a symbol of patriarchy, was in reality the embodiment of radical love and liberation. He was not the oppressor I had imagined, but the liberator, the one who calls us to freedom through grace. His tears, his compassion, his willingness to suffer for the brokenness of humanity, it was unlike anything I had understood before. I pored over scriptures, not with the critical eye of a scholar dissecting texts for political or social critique, but with a searching heart desperate to understand the truth. The gospel spoke of a love so profound it turned the world upside down. Jesus welcomed the marginalized, healed the hurting, and offered hope to the hopeless. He broke every chain, not just physical or social, but spiritual and emotional. But the professor in me wrestled with doubt and fear. How could I reconcile this personal encounter with my intellectual beliefs? Would my colleagues, my peers in academia, understand or accept this transformation? I feared ridicule, ostracism, and the loss of my platform. Yet the peace I had felt in that radiant light far outweighed any worldly consequence. Tears often came unbidden as I prayed for strength to walk this new path. I no longer wanted to fight against faith, but to live it authentically, to embody the love that had overwhelmed me. My activism took on a new dimension, not just fighting injustice in society, but advocating for a spiritual freedom that only Jesus can bring. I began sharing pieces of my testimony cautiously, with trusted friends who listened without judgment. Their questions, their doubts, mirrored my own. But together, we explored this new faith that had redefined everything. I am still a feminist, still passionate about justice and equality. But now, my feminism is informed and transformed by a faith that sees dignity and value in every person as created and loved by God. The tears I cried when I saw Jesus were not tears of weakness, but the beginning of a new strength rooted in grace. My journey continues, marked by both struggle and hope. I am no longer the same professor who challenged faith from a distance. I am a woman who has been touched, broken, and healed by the love of Jesus. And that changes everything. The more I reflected on that divine encounter, the more I realized how deeply my worldview had been challenged. And yet, in the midst of that challenge, something beautiful was unfolding. Jesus had not only revealed himself to me, but had also opened my eyes to the deeper truths about love, freedom, and redemption. These truths transcended the ideological battles I had spent my life fighting. I remembered vividly how I had often criticized the church for perpetuating patriarchy, how I had argued that religion had been a tool of control and oppression over women and marginalized communities. And yet, standing in that radiant light, I saw that Jesus was not the embodiment of those systems, but the one who came to dismantle every chain, physical, social, and spiritual. His message was revolutionary in every sense: to love fiercely, to forgive radically, and to serve humbly. The tears I shed during the encounter were tears of release. Release from bitterness, from anger, from the deep wounds I carried. I realized that true liberation was not just political or social, it was spiritual. It was the freedom to be known, loved, and redeemed by a God who values every person beyond their gender, race, or status. Returning to my body was like awakening from a profound dream, but the transformation inside me was real and lasting. My heart had softened. My spirit had been humbled. I began to see my own activism through a new lens, not as a fight against faith, but as a call to embody the love and justice that Jesus exemplified. I struggled with doubts and fear to reconcile my past with this new reality, how to face my academic community, how to integrate faith with feminism. But I knew that I could no longer deny what I had seen and felt. This was not a rejection of my intellect, but an expansion of ETA recognition that the greatest truths are sometimes beyond reason alone and found in encounter and grace. Prayer became my refuge, a place where I laid down my pride and sought guidance. I began to understand that Jesus' tears were not only for me, but for a world longing to be healed. His love was a balm for my wounded soul, and a call to live authentically in that love. I started speaking softly to those close to me about my experience, cautious but compelled by a desire to share the hope that had flooded my heart. The feminist professor who once challenged faith now found herself drawn toward a deeper understanding of God's mercy and gracia journey that was both terrifying and exhilarating. This encounter did not erase my passion for justice, it transformed it. Now my fight was not just for social equality, but for the spiritual freedom that Jesus offers to all who come to him with open hearts. The journey ahead remains uncertain, but I walk it with courage, knowing that the God who met me in my darkest hour will never leave me. I am a feminist, a scholar, and now a believer woman whose tears in the presence of Jesus marked the beginning of a new life, rooted in love, hope, and faith. As I continue to process the encounter, I found myself grappling with the profound paradox of my life's journey. For decades, I had wielded my intellect and passion to deconstruct religious narratives, to challenge the status quo, to expose injustices perpetuated under the guise of faith. Yet now, in the wake of that near-death experience, everything I thought I knew was being reassembled on a foundation far stronger than reason alone. A foundation of grace, mercy, and unconditional love. Jesus had shattered my preconceived notions. He was not the oppressor or the symbol of patriarchal control I had often portrayed. Instead, he was the liberator, the one who came to free the oppressed, uplift the marginalized, and invite all into a transformative relationship with God. The tears I had shed in his presence were not tears of weakness, but of profound healing. They washed away years of bitterness, doubt, and fear. The weight of this revelation pressed on me, both exhilarating and terrifying. I realized that faith is not merely a collection of doctrines to be accepted or rejected based on logic, but a living encounter with the divine that transforms from the inside out. It was humbling to admit that the answers I sought in textbooks and theories paled in comparison to the reality I had been shown, a reality that demanded surrender, not just critique. I found myself reading scripture anew, this time not to find faults or contradictions, but to seek understanding. The Gospels became a lifeline, a source of hope and inspiration. I was drawn to the stories of Jesus' compassion, his outreach to women, his challenge to societal norms, and his call to radical love. This Jesus was the true feminist ally, the one who honored the dignity of every human being and shattered every chain of injustice. Yet, I also faced an internal battle. How would I reconcile this new faith with my identity as a feminist professor? How would I stand before my students and colleagues, knowing that my heart had been changed in ways that defied easy explanation? Fear of rejection and ridicule haunted me, but the peace and joy I felt far outweighed those fears. In quiet moments, I prayed for courage and wisdom. I sought to integrate my passion for justice with my newfound faith, recognizing that true liberation comes through love, a love that empowers, heals, and restores. I began to see my activism as part of a larger spiritual mission, a calling to embody the justice and mercy Jesus taught. The journey was far from easy. Doubts still surfaced, and old habits of skepticism lingered. But I was no longer the woman who had mocked faith from a distance. I was a woman transformed by grace, humbled by mercy, and filled with a hope that transcended understanding. I cried often, not just for myself, but for a world desperately in need of healing. My tears were prayers, my heart a battleground where faith and reason met. I was learning to live in the tension, trusting that Jesus who met me in the light would guide me through the shadows. I am still a feminist, still a scholar, but now I am also a believer woman whose life was forever changed by an encounter with the living God. The tears I cried when I saw Jesus marked the end of one chapter and the beginning of a new, sacred journey of faith, hope, and love. The weeks that followed my near-death experience were a time of deep reflection and intense inner turmoil. Though my body had survived, my soul was restless, unsettled by the encounter with Jesus that had dismantled so much of what I once believed. I found myself walking a narrow path between the woman I had been an outspoken, rational feminist professor and the woman I was becoming, humbled and transformed by divine love. Every day I wrestled with questions that had no easy answers. How could I hold on to my commitment to justice, equality, and human rights while embracing a faith that I had once viewed as complicit in the very systems I opposed? Could I reconcile my intellectual integrity with the vulnerability that faith demanded? Would my colleagues, students, and loved ones accept the changes that were unfolding in me, or would I face alienation and scorn? Despite the fears, I could not deny the peace that came from surrendering to the love I had seen in Jesus. His tears had been a mirror, reflecting my own brokenness and my deepest longings for healing. His voice had been a balm, calling me not to abandon my passion for justice, but to root it in grace and mercy. I began to understand that true liberation was not just social or political, but spiritual freedom from bitterness, pride, and fear. My prayers became more personal and raw. I no longer recited them as academic exercises, but as heartfelt conversations with the one who had met me in my darkest hour. I asked for strength to walk this new path, for courage to speak my truth, and for wisdom to live authentically amidst uncertainty. Slowly, I began to share pieces of my testimony with trusted friends. Their responses varied. Some were supportive, others skeptical, and a few were openly hostile. Yet each conversation deepened my resolve. I saw that faith, like feminism, required courageous willingness to stand for truth even when it was unpopular or misunderstood. I also saw a new vision for my activism emerging. It was not enough to fight external injustices. I needed to confront the internal struggles that hindered true freedom, the wounds of the heart and soul. I wanted to be an agent of healing, a voice that bridged divides and fostered reconciliation. The encounter with Jesus had shattered my old arguments and convictions, but it had also planted seeds of hope and transformation. I was learning to embrace the coexistence of doubt and faith, strength and vulnerability, intellect and surrender. I wept often, but these tears were no longer only of sorrow. They were tears of gratitude, humility, and renewal. They marked the journey of a woman discovering that the fiercest battles are not fought with words alone, but with a heart open to grace. I remain a feminist professor, but now my voice carries a new depth of testimony of a love so powerful that it can break down walls, heal wounds, and set souls free. The journey is long and fraught with challenges, but I walk it with a courage born of the one who met me and changed me forever. Months have passed since that life-altering near-death experience, yet the memory of Jesus' gaze and the flood of tears I shed in his presence remain vivid, shaping every thought and action. I am no longer the woman who viewed faith through a lens of critique and opposition, I have become a seeker of deeper truth, humbled and transformed by an encounter that defies explanation. The more I explored the Gospels, the more I discovered that Jesus' mission was one of radical inclusion and empowerment. He lifted women from the margins, challenged oppressive social structures, and proclaimed a kingdom where the last would be first, and the meek would inherit the earth. This was a feminism rooted not in ideology, but in the heart of Goda love that breaks every chain and restores dignity to all. Yet, the tension between my past and present beliefs remains palpable. The academic world where I have built my career is often skeptical, if not hostile, toward faith. I have faced whispered judgments, veiled questions, and the loneliness that comes with walking a path few understand. But these challenges pale in comparison to the peace that fills me when I remember the light, the love, and the tears that flowed freely in that transcendent moment. Prayer has become my lifeline. I pray not for easy answers, but for courage to live authentically, for wisdom to navigate the complexities of my dual identity as a feminist and a follower of Christ, and for grace to extend love to those who doubt or oppose me. I have learned that faith is not a fixed destination, but a journey, a daily choice to trust a God who meets us in our brokenness and calls us to wholeness. My activism has deepened, enriched by a spirituality that centers love and reconciliation. I advocate not only for equality and justice, but for the healing of hearts and the building of bridges across divides. I share my testimony openly now, hoping to inspire others who wrestle with doubt or who feel alienated from faith. The tears I cried when I saw Jesus were a beginning, a breaking open that revealed my deepest need for grace. They continue to fall, not from weakness, but from the overwhelming reality of a love that transforms, restores, and empowers. I am still a feminist, still a scholar, but now I walk in the light of a faith that challenges and sustains me. My life is a testament to the power of Jesus, to reach beyond our walls of skepticism and break through to the heart. The journey ahead is uncertain, but I walk it with hope, courage, and the unshakable assurance that the one who met me in death now walks with me in life. My story is one of transformation, and I am forever grateful. Now, as I reflect on the entirety of my journey, the skeptic, the activist, the woman who once wielded logic as a shield against faith, I see how Jesus' love has rewritten the story of my life. The tears I shed when I saw him were the tears of a soul breaking open to a truth greater than any ideology or academic theory. They were tears of surrender, healing, and hope. Jesus met me in my deepest pain and my fiercest doubts. He did not condemn me for the questions I asked or the battles I fought. Instead, he invited me into a relationship rooted in grace and compassion. His love shattered every barrier I had erected, barriers built from fear, anger, and misunderstanding, and replaced them with a peace that passes all understanding. I have come to understand that true feminism is not opposed to faith, but can be enriched and transformed by it. Jesus exemplified a radical respect and dignity for women, calling them to be co-heirs of the kingdom and inviting them into intimate fellowship with God. His mission was liberation, freedom from sin, fear, and oppression in all its forms. Though the road ahead is uncertain and often lonely, I walk it with courage and conviction, grounded in the knowledge that I am deeply loved by a God who sees me fully and calls me his own. I embrace the paradox of my life, a feminist professor who has been transformed by Jesus' mercy, called to live authentically in both worlds. My tears were not the end, but the beginning of a new chapter marked by grace, healing, and a profound commitment to love. I share my story not as a destination, but as an invitation to anyone who feels lost, broken, or skeptical that Jesus' love is real, powerful, and available to all. This journey has taught me that faith is not the enemy of reason, but its fulfillment, not the suppression of identity, but its true liberation. And so, I continue forward, a woman renewed, a voice changed, and a heart forever held in the embrace of the one who cried with me and gave me new life.